Imagine your own sibling demanding you pay their mortgage, threatening to tear the family apart if you refused. What would you do? I never thought I'd reach a point where the people closest to me would turn into the ones I had to protect myself from, but that's exactly what happened. My name is Anthony. And for most of my life, I was the quiet one in the family. The steady one. The guy who worked hard, kept his head down, and didn't stir up unnecessary drama. I was the first in my family to graduate from college. I bought my own house before I hit 30, and I'd built a career I actually enjoyed. By all accounts, I should have been proud of where I was. And honestly, I was. Until the day my younger sister decided that my success wasn't really mine, it was hers for the taking. The call that changed everything. It all started right after I got promoted earlier this year. It was a big deal. Better pay, more responsibility, and the chance to relocate to another state if I wanted to. For once, it felt like all those late nights, all those skipped vacations, all the sacrifices were finally paying off. I shared the news with my parents. They congratulated me, but not in the way I had hoped. Their tone felt distracted, like their minds were elsewhere. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe they were tired. Maybe something else was on their minds. But a week later, my phone rang. And that's when everything shifted. It was my sister, Melissa. She didn't even bother with a hello. Instead, she launched straight in. I lost my job, and you're going to have to help me with my mortgage until I get back on my feet. At first, I laughed. I thought it was a joke, the kind of sarcastic jab siblings throw at each other when life gets tough. But Melissa wasn't joking. Her tone sharpened immediately. This isn't funny, Anthony. I'm serious. You make way more money than I do, and I'm not losing my house because you're too selfish to help. I froze. My blood pressure spiked. She was asking me no, telling me to cover thousands of dollars a month. Not a short-term loan for groceries. Not a one-off emergency car repair. She wanted me to take on her bills indefinitely. I asked her about her savings. She snapped that she didn't have any. I asked her why she thought this was my responsibility. Her answer? Because you're family, that's what family does. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about entitlement. I told her flat out. I'm not paying your mortgage. Click. She hung up. Not even an hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my dad. His text was short but sharp. If you don't step up for your sister, you're out of the will. Cutting the ties. I sat there staring at my phone. My hands actually shook. I hadn't asked my parents for a single cent since I was 18. I put myself through college. I bought my own house. I built my career brick by brick. And now, they were threatening to cut me out of their will because I refused to bankroll my sister's irresponsibility. That night, I quietly logged into every shared family account. The emergency fund. The savings account we had all chipped into when my grandmother passed away. Even the vacation cabin account that was supposed to be used for family getaways. And I removed my name from all of them. If they were going to treat me like the villain, I wasn't going to leave my money sitting there to be drained. By sunrise, I had 37 missed calls. Dozens of angry texts from every direction. My mom, my dad, Melissa, even my aunt. Some messages were guilt trips. Family sticks together, Anthony. Some were threats. You'll regret this. Others were just plain insults. I didn't respond to a single one. For the first time, I let myself really feel the anger. Not the low simmer I'd always shoved aside for the sake of keeping the peace. But deep, genuine anger. This wasn't just about Melissa's house. This was about years of being treated as the backup plan. The fixer. The one who worked hard not for his own future, but as a safety net for everyone else's mistakes. And I made a decision. The next family dinner was only a few days away. I was going to show up. But this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. Ambush at dinner. Family dinners at my parents' house were usually casual. People came and went, grabbed food from the kitchen, laughed around the table. But that Sunday, the moment I walked in, I knew something was off. Everyone was already seated. The atmosphere was tight, expectant, like they'd been waiting for me. Melissa sat smugly beside my mom, arms crossed, eyes gleaming like she had already won. Anthony, my dad said, gesturing at the empty chair. Sit down. We need to talk as a family. I sat, but my guard was up. My mom wasted no time. Melissa's been under a lot of stress, and you laughing at her when she called you for help was completely inappropriate. I kept my voice calm. I didn't laugh at her losing her job. I laughed, because she called me and told me I was going to pay her mortgage like it was an order. Melissa jumped in immediately. Because you should. You're the only one in this family who can afford it. Something in me hardened right then. No, Melissa, I can afford it because I work for it. And I am not responsible for your mortgage. My dad leaned forward. Anthony, You have to understand. She's in a tough spot. Her house is all she has. If she loses it, she'll have nowhere to go. I almost laughed at the irony. She has somewhere to go. Right here. You've let her move back in before. But that's not what this is about. Is it? This is about the fact that for once, I'm not swooping in to clean up her mess and none of you like it. Melissa's face turned red. Her voice cracked with venom. You think you're better than me just because you have some fancy job, a house, a nice car. You think that makes you special? From Othing my card from Miracle Presses. My card from my reason. It stung, not because it was true, but because I could hear the jealousy dripping from her voice. I took a slow breath. No, Melissa. I don't think I'm better. I just think I'm tired of being treated like my hard work is some kind of community piggy bank. My mom sighed dramatically. Anthony, we've always helped each other in this family. When you were in school and needed help with rent, I cut her off. I never asked you for money. I worked 2 jobs. I even slept in my car for a week one semester because I couldn't make rent. And I didn't ask you for a dime. That shut them up for a moment. But Melissa wasn't done. She sniffled, playing the wounded little sister. I just don't know why you hate me so much that you'd watch me lose my house. And that was it. That was the moment the whole script flipped. She wasn't asking for help anymore. She was framing my refusal as cruelty. Like I was choosing to ruin her life. I felt my jaw clench. You know what I think, Melissa? I think you've gotten so used to everyone bending over backward for you that the second someone says no, you act like it's a personal attack. Drawing the line, my dad slammed his hands on the table. That's enough, Anthony. But I wasn't finished. No, it's not enough. You told me I was out of the will if I didn't bail her out. Fine, keep your will. Keep everything. But don't you dare call me selfish for refusing to go broke over someone else's choices. The room went dead silent. My mom looked like I'd slapped her. Melissa's eyes widened, but behind the tears, I saw at that flicker of triumph. The look of someone who finally thought they had exposed me as the villain. Dinner limped along after that. Awkward and heavy. I barely touched my food. When I left, my mom hugged me stiffly and whispered, "You'll understand someday." I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. My pulse was still racing, and I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Because Melissa had that look. The look she always got when she didn't get her way but was already scheming about how to make sure she would. The smear campaign, sure enough, within days, I started getting calls from extended family. My aunt rang me up to tell me Melissa had been crying, saying she didn't know how she'd survive because I had abandoned her. My cousin texted to say he'd heard I was refusing to help, and that it was pretty cold. Melissa had gone public. She posted on Facebook about how some people would rather watch family lose everything than lend a helping hand. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. Half the comments were relatives and family friends calling me selfish. Money changes people. Guess he forgot where he came from. That one stung the most, because I hadn't forgotten. If anything, I remembered too well. I remembered all the times I'd been told to be the bigger person when Melissa took my things without asking. I remembered the summer I had to skip a school trip because my parents had drained my savings to bail her out of some mess. I remembered every time being the responsible one was treated like a badge of honor when really, it just meant I was the one they could rely on to sacrifice. And I realized, this wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage, it was about years of being expected to give more, do more, and never complain. And the next family dinner? I knew it was going to be worse. The next family dinner was coming up, and I could already feel the storm brewing. I knew what was waiting for me. The guilt trips, the confrontation, the pressure to cave. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just bracing myself for another attack. I was curious to see just how far they'd go this time, a setup I didn't see coming. When Sunday rolled around, the scene outside my parents' house was already off. Too many cars lined the street, my aunt's SUV, my uncle's truck, even my grandmother's old sedan. This wasn't just a normal Sunday dinner. It looked more like a summit. I stepped inside and froze in the hallway. From the dining room came the low hum of voices, heated, sharp. And then I heard my name. He could pay off the whole mortgage tomorrow and still have money left over, Melissa was saying. He just doesn't want to help. My dad's voice followed, stern and authoritative. He's always been stubborn. We just have to make him see reason. And then my mom. We can't let Melissa lose her house. It would be humiliating. Humiliating. Not tragic. Not devastating. Humiliating like this was more about their pride than her survival. I stepped into the room. The conversation cut off instantly. At the head of the table sat my grandmother, quiet and watchful, like a judge presiding over court. She looked tired, disappointed. And that hurt more than anything. My dad gestured to the chair again. Sit down, Anthony. We need to settle this once and for all. The accusation. I sat, my pulse pounding in my ears. Melissa leaned forward, her voice theatrical, like she was giving testimony in front of a jury. I've tried everything. I sold my jewelry. I canceled my gym membership. I even stopped ordering takeout. I'm doing my part. But if I don't make this month's payment, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. Do you really want that on your conscience? She looked straight at me, daring me to be the villain in front of everyone. I held her gaze. Melissa, you've had months to get ahead of this. Why didn't you look for a roommate? Why didn't you talk to the bank about refinancing? Why was your first and only solution to call me and tell me it's my responsibility? Her lip curled. Because you're family. You've always been the one with the good job. The nice things. The safety net. You're just going to sit there and let me lose everything while you live your perfect little life somewhere else? That's certain now, Jack. Instead and certain of say. I could feel the eyes of everyone at that table drilling into me, waiting for me to say the magic words that would fix it all. And then my dad dropped the bomb. The line of credit. We've made a decision, he said, his tone clipped. Your mother and I went to the bank this week. We took out a line of credit against the cabin property. My stomach dropped. You what? To help Melissa, he said matter-of-factly. To keep her from losing her home. It was the right thing to do. AB. The cabin property. The one piece of family legacy that was supposed to belong to all of us, me, Melissa, even our cousin Jake when my parents passed. The one thing that was supposed to be untouchable. You didn't even tell me, I said flatly. My mom bristled. We didn't need your permission. You've made it clear you don't care about this family's problems. So we did what we had to do. I laughed, bitter and humorless. So let me get this straight. You threatened to cut me out of the will if I didn't help Melissa. I said fine. And your solution was to mortgage part of my inheritance anyway, just so she could stay in a house she can't afford. Melissa crossed her arms, smug. It's not your inheritance yet. And when I get back on my feet, I'll pay it back. Just like you paid back the emergency fund. Not against a ready-to-it prize. Who and he round. Rester tame. I snapped. Like you paid back the car money 2 years ago? Or the vacation account? Her face turned crimson. My dad's jaw tightened. That's enough. He growled. But it wasn't enough for me. Breaking point. You went behind my back, I said slowly, staring at them one by one. You used something that was supposed to belong to all of us to clean up her mess. And you didn't even bother to ask. You didn't even bother to tell me until it was already done. For the first time, my grandmother spoke, her voice frail but steady. He's right. You should have asked him. The ripple of her words shifted the air, but my dad brushed it off. We did what was necessary. If Anthony doesn't want to contribute, then we'll move forward without him. And something in me broke. Some final thread holding me to the idea that we were all on the same team. I stood up. You know what? You've made your choice. You've made it clear where I stand in this family. And I hear you loud and clear. My mom narrowed her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Anthony. I turned to her, my hands trembling not from fear, but from everything I'd held back for years. Dramatic? You mortgaged part of the only thing that ever tied me to this family. You've spent my whole life bending over backward to make sure Melissa never feels the consequences of her actions. And you've spent my whole life expecting me to pick up the slack. Well, congratulations. You don't have to worry about that anymore. I walked out before they could respond. Aftermath. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive home and never speak to them again. Another part of me was already thinking of ways to make sure they could never do this to me again. By the time I pulled onto the highway, my mind was racing. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done. Done being the good son. Done being the backup plan. Done being the quiet one while Melissa got away with everything. And in that clarity, I realized something powerful. I had more leverage than they thought. I had access to documents, to accounts, to information they had probably forgotten I even knew about. For the first time in years, I wasn't just thinking about defending myself. I was thinking about fighting back. Grief and anger. That night, I sat in my silent house and finally let the grief wash over me. Not just anger grief. Grief for the family I thought I had. Grief for the story I'd told myself, that deep down we had each other's backs. I realized that was never true. It had always been a one-way street. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. When my phone buzzed again, this time a long message from my parents about how they hoped I'd cool off and come to my senses, I didn't reply. When Melissa sent a separate text with a crying emoji, saying, "You really hurt me tonight. I don't know how you can live with yourself." I tossed my phone across the couch. I didn't trust myself to respond. The box of documents. That whole week, I went through the motions at work, but my head was elsewhere. My coworkers probably thought I was stressed about the promotion or the relocation. But in reality, I was replaying that dinner over and over. One night, unable to sleep, I dug out an old box from the closet. It was filled with family paperwork I hadn't looked at in years, copies of the trust documents, tax forms, and even old cabin property records. I remembered being the one who had helped my parents organize their estate planning years ago. I'd been the one calling the lawyer, setting up meetings, filing documents, and that's when I noticed something I had forgotten. My name was listed as co-trustee in case something happened to my parents. That meant I had rights, access to information, the ability to request records. The realization was like a spark in the dark. I wasn't ready to act on it yet. But I knew now. I wasn't powerless. A quiet decision. The next Sunday, I skipped family dinner. My mom left a voicemail calling me sulky. My dad sent a curt text. "We're disappointed in you." Melissa posted another Facebook update about toxic relatives and fake family. Mutual friends messaged me, asking if everything was okay. It was humiliating. I muted the family group chat. I stopped checking social media. And then I threw myself into work. If I was going to break free, I needed to focus on my own life. And slowly, the weight started to lift. For a while, life almost felt normal again. I poured my energy into work. I started working out consistently for the first time in years. I met up with friends I hadn't seen in months. Piece by piece, I was building a version of life that felt mine. But my family wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. The letter. It came one afternoon in the mail. A plain white envelope from the bank. Addressed to me. Inside was a notice about the line of credit my parents had taken out against the cabin property. Because my name was still listed on one of the accounts, the bank had sent me a copy. I stared at the paper, and something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage anymore. This was about my parents putting our family's future, my future, on the line. That night, I pulled out the box of paperwork again. I combed through every clause, every footnote. I highlighted sections. I scribbled notes in the margins, and I realized I had options. The plan. I wasn't going to storm in and start screaming. That had never worked before. If I was going to protect myself, I needed to be methodical. So, I scheduled another meeting with the lawyer who had helped my parents set up the trust years ago. Just the two of us this time. I asked questions. Lots of them. What were my rights as co-trustee? What could I do if I believed the trust was being mismanaged? What options did I have to protect my share of the cabin's value? The lawyer explained everything in detail. I could request a full accounting of the debt. I could insist on regular updates about payments. And if necessary, I could even petition the court to protect my interest if I believed mismanagement was happening. That last word stuck with me. Mismanagement, playing the long game. I didn't confront my parents right away. Instead, I started laying the groundwork quietly. I attended family dinners again. Smiled politely when my mom made digs about how nice it must be to have money. Nodded when Melissa complained about how hard it was to find a job in this economy. Outwardly, I looked calm, cooperative, even conciliatory. But behind the scenes, I was building a picture. I talked to the bank under the pretense of needing information for estate planning. They confirmed the repayment schedule. And sure enough, my parents were already behind. One more missed payment, and they'd be in default. And then, almost by accident, I discovered something else. The job opportunity. A coworker mentioned that our company was opening a new branch not far from where my parents lived. Not just an office, but a major branch, one that would be hiring aggressively. Administrative roles. Marketing roles. Support staff. Exactly the kind of positions Melissa could apply for. I did some digging. Within a week, HR confirmed that job postings would be going live soon. Good pay. Good benefits. Stable work. I bookmarked the listings and even printed them out. Not to hand to her yet, but to keep in my back pocket. Because the best revenge, I realized, wouldn't be some big blow-up. It would be quiet. Patient. It would be letting them walk themselves into a corner, until they had no one left to lean on but me, and then, showing them the solutions they had refused to see. Grandma's call. A few weeks later my phone rang. It was my grandmother. She didn't start by mentioning Melissa or the debt. She asked how I was doing, how work was going, how the move was coming along. Then she got quiet. "You know, Anthony," she said softly, "I think you were right to stand your ground. Your parents love you, but they've let things get out of hand with your sister." It caught me off guard. She had been so silent at those dinners. I'd assumed she agreed with them. "I just hate seeing the family torn apart," she continued. "But you can't be the only one carrying the weight forever. I hope they realize that soon. It is no grast, it is not half the way she was generally, an expense of the maidie and the savants." Her words lit a spark in me. If Grandma, the one person everyone in the family listened to, was quietly on my side, Then maybe I wasn't as isolated as they wanted me to feel. Cracks in the united front. And sure enough, I started noticing changes. My mom seemed more stressed at dinner. Less quick to jump to Melissa's defense. My dad was quieter than usual, distracted. And Melissa? She was still posting her dramatic updates online about fake family and toxic relatives. But this time, some of her friends started pushing back. Have you considered getting a roommate? One commented. There are plenty of jobs out there if you really look. Another added. Even her circle was losing patience. I stayed silent. But privately, I made my next move. The formal request. I emailed the lawyer and asked him to draft a formal request for a full financial accounting of the trust. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, just a professional, official document, requiring my parents to provide proof of every transaction related to the cabin property loan. When the email came back with a copy of the request, I sat at my desk, staring at it for a long time. This was it. The first domino, because the second they opened that letter, they would know I wasn't bluffing anymore. I wasn't just the stubborn son. I was a co-trustee with legal rights, and I was watching. The call. Less than 24 hours later, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was tight, controlled. The voice he used when he was trying not to yell. Anthony, he said, skipping hello. What is this letter we just got from the lawyer? It's a request for the trust's financial records, I said evenly. Pretty standard. As co-trustee, I have a right to see them. You're making this into a legal matter, he snapped. We're family. I know we are, I said calmly. And I'm not contesting anything. I just want to know exactly what was done with the property we all have a stake in. Silence. I could almost picture him grinding his teeth. You didn't have to go through a lawyer, he finally said. Yes, I said softly. I did, and I could hear it, the tiny catch in his breath. The moment he realized I wasn't bluffing. Dinner with a new dynamic. That Sunday, I showed up to dinner dressed sharp, calm as ever. I didn't storm in. I didn't start with accusations. I greeted everyone politely, even Melissa, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Dinner was tense. My dad didn't say much. My mom gave me worried glances. Melissa tapped her nails on the table like a drumbeat of irritation. Finally, halfway through the meal, my dad broke the silence. We got your request. The paperwork's being prepared. Good, I said, nodding. Melissa rolled her eyes. This is so over the top, Anthony. You're acting like we stole from you or something. I set my fork down. You used a family asset without consulting everyone who had a stake in it. That's not theft. But it is mismanagement. My mom flinched at the word. My dad's jaw tightened. I'm not here to fight, I continued. I'm here to make sure that from now on, there's transparency. Every dollar that goes in or out related to the cabin will be documented and shared. If payments are late, I'll know. If the bank threatens foreclosure, I'll know. And if I think things are heading in the wrong direction, I'll take steps to protect my share legally. Melissa scoffed. You'd drag your own parents to court? I looked her dead in the eye. If it meant protecting the one thing Grandma wanted us to have? Yes. Her mouth snapped shut, and then from the end of the table Grandma spoke. Her voice soft but steady. He's right. It was wrong not to tell him. This isn't just about you, Melissa. That felt like the first real win in months. The job postings. I leaned back, smiled, and then reached into my bag. Oh, and I brought something for you, Melissa. Her eyes narrowed as I slid a stack of papers across the table. Printed job postings from my company's new branch. They're hiring locally, I said lightly. Good pay, good benefits. I flagged a few roles you'd qualify for. Applications open this week. Her face flushed red. You think this is funny? Not at all, I replied calmly. I think it's a solution. You get a job. You make your payments. And this stops being a family crisis. She shoved the papers back at me. I'm not taking some hand-me-down job you picked out for me. I shrugged, tucked them back in my bag. That's your choice. But don't say nobody tried to help. And they're not at in Stolkane Clue safe for. He had again. Stated mild brand. And with that, I went back to eating. The conversation moved on, but the dynamic at the table had shifted. For once I wasn't cornered. They were. The night I handed Melissa those job postings was the first time in months I felt like I was ahead of the game. For so long, it felt like I was reacting, defending myself against her demands, my parents' guilt trips, the endless family drama. But sliding that stack of papers across the table? That was me taking control. Still, I knew Melissa. She wasn't going to take the hint gracefully. And I was right. Melissa's outburst. The next day, I woke up to a flood of notifications. Melissa had posted again. This time, not a vague toxic relatives rant. No, she went all in. A long Facebook post about how her own brother was trying to humiliate her by pushing her into beneath her jobs. She claimed I wanted her to become a corporate slave, instead of supporting her while she looked for meaningful work. The comment section blew up. Some people sympathized, but others pushed back. One person wrote, "At least he's giving you options. A job's a job." Another said, "Lots of us would kill for the stability those roles offer. Stop acting like you're above it." For the first time, the tide wasn't entirely in her favor, and that's when I realized something crucial. Melissa was starting to lose her audience. Parents in panic. That evening, my mom called. "Anthony, why would you embarrass your sister like that? She's already struggling." I kept my tone steady. I wasn't embarrassing her. I was offering a solution. She doesn't have to take it. But I'm not going to bankroll her. This way, she has an option. My mom sighed, exhausted. "She's not you, Anthony. She can't just fall into good jobs like you do." That stung. All those years of grinding, of late nights, of sacrificing, reduced to falling into it. And say did tin his brugs. But instead of snapping, I said calmly, "Then maybe it's time she learns. Because I'm not carrying this anymore." Silence stretched between us. Finally, my mom said, "You've changed." And for once, I smiled to myself. "No, Mom. I've just stopped pretending." The records arrive. A week later, a thick envelope arrived from my parents' lawyer. Inside was the full accounting of the cabin trust. I sat at my kitchen table flipping through the pages. The numbers were worse than I expected. Not only had they taken out the line of credit, but they had already missed 2 payments. Fees were piling up. Interest rates were climbing. If they defaulted, the bank could force the sale of the cabin. I felt sick. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Grandma's legacy. The place where we had spent summers fishing, where we'd celebrated birthdays, where I'd first learned to drive, and all of it was hanging by a thread because of Melissa. Confrontation. That Sunday, I didn't wait for dinner to bring it up. I showed up with the documents in hand, laid them on the table, and said, "We need to talk about this." My dad bristled immediately. "Anthony, this is family business. Not everything has to be formal. This is family business," I shot back. "That's why it matters. You've already missed payments. You're putting the cabin at risk. Do you realize what that means?" Melissa rolled her eyes. "Here we go again. You love that stupid cabin more than you love your family." "No," I said coldly. "I just don't believe one person's poor choices should destroy something that belongs to all of us." My grandmother's voice cut through the tension. "He's right." Everyone turned. She looked frail, but her words were sharp. That cabin was meant to be shared, not sacrificed for one person's mortgage. If you keep missing payments, the bank will take it. And then nobody will have it. The silence that followed was heavy. For once, Melissa didn't have a comeback. The ultimatum. I leaned forward. "Here's the deal. From now on, I want monthly updates on payments. If you can't make them, I'll know. And if I see this sliding toward default, I'll file a petition to protect my share." That's not a threat, it's a promise. My dad's face turned red. "You'd drag us through court? If that's what it takes to stop losing everything?" "Yes," my mom whispered. "Anthony." Like she couldn't believe I was serious, but I was. And I needed them to know it. Melissa's last stand. Of course, Melissa didn't take it quietly. She stood up, pointing at me like a villain in some melodrama. "You just want me to fail. You'd rather see me on the street than lift a finger to help me." I shook my head slowly. "No, Melissa. I want you to take responsibility for once in your life. You've had endless lifelines. And every time, you've burned through them. I'm done handing you more rope just so you can hang the rest of us with it." She gasped, scandalized, as if I'd committed some crime, but no one rushed to defend her. Not even my parents. That told me everything I needed to know. Quiet victories. After that night, the calls slowed down. The guilt trips became less frequent. Melissa still posted online, but fewer people engaged. And little by little, I noticed something surprising. The weight on my shoulders was lifting. I wasn't constantly bracing for the next ambush. I wasn't obsessively replaying conversations in my head. I was free. And that freedom gave me space to think about my own future. The move. A few weeks later, I accepted the relocation offer from work. A new branch, new city, fresh start. When I told my parents, my mom's voice cracked. "So you're just leaving us?" I said gently. "No, Mom. I'm choosing myself for once." There was nothing she could say to that. The day I packed up my house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The final twist. Months later, after I'd settled into my new city, I got another letter. This time from the bank. It confirmed what I had suspected. My parents had defaulted on the line of credit. The cabin was being repossessed. I sat with the letter for a long time. Sadness washed over me. Anger too, but mostly relief, because it proved everything I'd been saying all along. that enabling Melissa's behavior didn't save anything. It only destroyed more. And I realized something profound. Sometimes, you can fight and fight to protect what's yours. But in the end, the real victory is walking away with your peace intact. Reflection. Looking back now, I see the whole saga differently. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about the cabin. It was about boundaries. About finally refusing to be the safety net for people who never learned to stand on their own. And it was about realizing that family doesn't give someone a free pass to exploit you. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even for them, is to say no. And mean it. When I first heard about the cabin being repossessed, I thought that was the final chapter. The end of the story. But life doesn't always wrap up neatly. Sometimes the fallout lingers, reshaping relationships in ways you don't expect. And for me, what came after was just as important as the battles themselves. The fallout. Once the cabin was gone, the silence set in. Melissa stopped posting online. Maybe because she didn't have an audience anymore. Maybe because even she realized there was nothing left to spin. My parents didn't call me for weeks. My mom sent the occasional message about hoping I was doing well. But nothing deeper. My dad stayed quiet. It was strange. After months of nonstop conflict, the quiet felt eerie. But it also felt like peace. New roots. In my new city, I was thriving. The promotion was everything I had hoped for. The team respected me. My boss trusted me. I had my own apartment with a balcony overlooking the skyline. And for the first time in years, I woke up excited about the day ahead. I made new friends. Started a running club. Learned to cook more than just scrambled eggs and pasta. And the more distance I put between myself and the chaos back home, the clearer everything became. It wasn't just that my family had crossed a line. It was that I had finally learned I didn't have to let them. The email. Then, one morning, out of the blue, I got an email from Melissa. No greeting. No small talk. Just a subject line that read, "You happy now?" The body of the email was short. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You let the cabin go. Grandma's heartbroken. I hope it was worth it." I stared at the screen, torn between fury and disbelief. I hadn't let anything go. They had. They missed the payments. They chose to tie Melissa's mortgage to the cabin instead of making her take responsibility. But in her mind, I was the villain. I closed the laptop without replying. Grandma's letter. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. In my grandmother's shaky script. "Anthony." It began, "I want you to know I don't blame you for what happened. You were the only one who tried to protect the cabin. The only one who saw clearly. I wish things had gone differently. But I don't hold it against you." I sat on my couch, reading those words over and over until they blurred through tears. Because in the end, her opinion was the only one that really mattered to me. A different kind of freedom. Losing the cabin hurt. There's no sugarcoating that. It felt like losing a piece of childhood. A piece of identity. But it also freed me. For years, that place had been held over my head. A promise. A bargaining chip. A reminder that I had something to lose if I didn't play by their rules. Now, that leverage was gone. And with it, so was their control. Melissa's next crisis. Of course, Melissa didn't stay quiet forever. Months later, I heard through a cousin that she had defaulted on her mortgage. The bank had repossessed her house. She was living back with my parents again. The irony wasn't lost on me. All that drama. All that pressure. All those demands that I step up for her. And in the end, she lost the house anyway. But here's the thing. When I heard the news, I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Because it didn't have to be this way. She could have taken those job postings. She could have swallowed her pride and made changes. But she didn't, and that was on her. A surprise call. One evening, months later, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Not angry. Not commanding. Just tired. "Anthony," he said, "I know things have been bad between us. But I wanted you to know we miss you." I sat in silence, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to say, "Now you miss me? After everything you put me through?" But another part of me, the part that had finally found peace, just said, "I hear you, Dad." That was all. And it was enough. Boundaries. Since then, things have been different. Not perfect. Not close. But different. I don't go home for every family dinner anymore. When I do, I go on my terms. I don't get dragged into guilt trips. I don't take the bait when Melissa makes her digs. I keep my boundaries. And slowly, they're starting to respect that. What I learned. Looking back, I realize this whole saga taught me something I wish I had learned years earlier. That family doesn't mean unconditional sacrifice. That boundaries don't make you selfish. That sometimes, the healthiest choice is walking away, even if it means losing things you thought you could never live without. Because in the end, the cabin was just wood and nails. What mattered was peace of mind, and for the first time in my life, I had it. Closing thoughts. If you've ever been in a situation like mine where family expects you to carry more than your share, where guilt and obligation are used like weapons, then hear this. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect yourself, and you are allowed to build a life that's yours, even if it means letting go of the one you were born into, because at the end of the day, peace is priceless. And for me, that was the lesson worth every ounce of the pain it took to learn it. By the time the dust had settled, I thought the story was over. I had moved cities, carved out a new life, and set boundaries that had finally given me peace. But stories like this don't really end cleanly. They echo. They ripple out in ways you don't expect. And sometimes, those echoes circle back in surprising ways. The cousin's visit. One Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Jake. "Hey, I'm in your city this weekend. Want to grab a beer?" Jake and I had always been close. He wasn't caught up in the family drama the same way Melissa was, but he had always been on the sidelines. Quiet. Observing. When we met at a little brewery downtown, he didn't waste time. "Man," he said, shaking his head. "Things back home are a mess." "You were right." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Melissa. The mortgage. The cabin. All of it. Everyone's finally starting to see it. The reality check." Jake filled me in. Melissa was still living with my parents. She hadn't found work. My parents were draining their retirement savings to keep her afloat. And the tension in the house was unbearable. "Uncle just looks defeated," Jake said. "And your mom's worn down. They don't even bring up the cabin anymore. Too raw, I guess. But it's like all of them are realizing what you said was true, and they just can't admit it out loud." I sat there, letting it sink in. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sad. Because I hadn't wanted to be right. I had wanted them to listen before it got this bad. Jake's confession. Then Jake leaned in, lowering his voice. "Anthony, Grandma talks about you a lot. She tells me you're the only one who stood your ground. She wishes the others had listened. She even said if she could redo her will, she'd leave her part of the cabin property's value directly to you." That hit me hard. I didn't need the money. I didn't need an inheritance. But hearing that she saw me not as selfish, not as cold, but as the one who tried to do the right thing, meant everything. I nodded slowly. "Thanks for telling me that, Jake." "Really?" He smiled. "You did what I wish I had the guts to do years ago." An unexpected email. A week later, I got another message, this time from my mom. It wasn't long, just a couple of paragraphs. She apologized. Not fully, not dramatically. But she admitted she hadn't been fair to me. That she had leaned too hard on me because she thought I could handle it. That she never realized how much it cost me to always be the strong one. Reading it, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. But it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's even more powerful. Melissa's silence. Meanwhile, Melissa stayed quiet. No emails, no texts, no posts aimed at me. I think she finally realized I wasn't coming back to the role she had cast me in: the fixer, the provider, the brother who would bend until I broke. And without me as her target, she had to face the reality of her own choices. It must have been brutal, but it wasn't my burden anymore. Redefining family. Over time, I began to rebuild a different kind of relationship with my parents. Not the old dynamic, where guilt and obligation dictated everything. Now, it was cautious, polite, honest, but with boundaries. We didn't talk every day. Sometimes we went weeks without a call. But when we did talk, it was lighter, less charged. I think they knew they had pushed me too far. And if they wanted me in their lives at all, they'd have to respect my limits. A dinner that felt different. Months later, I went back for a holiday dinner. It was the first time in years that I felt calm walking into the house. Melissa was there, of course. Sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone. She barely acknowledged me, and that was fine, because for the first time, her silence wasn't a weapon. It was just silence. Dinner went on without the usual explosions. My parents didn't push. My grandmother smiled at me across the table, her eyes warm with quiet approval, and I realized, this was what boundaries did. They didn't always fix people. But they made space for peace. Reflection. Looking back, I see the whole story as less about Melissa's mortgage, and more about a lesson I should have learned sooner. That peace comes when you stop trying to control other people's choices and start taking responsibility for your own. I couldn't stop Melissa from making bad decisions. I couldn't stop my parents from enabling her. But I could stop myself from being dragged down with them, and once I did, everything changed. Closing thoughts. If you're watching this and you've been in a similar spot, if you've been the one carrying the weight, the one expected to fix everything, here's what I want you to know. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to protect yourself. And you're allowed to walk away from roles that suffocate you, even if the people around you don't understand, because at the end of the day, you only get one life. And it belongs to you. You'd think after everything, the mortgage, the cabin, the constant battles, I'd be done talking about my family. And for a while, I was. I needed space. I needed to live without their voices echoing in my head. But the truth is, family doesn't just disappear. They resurface in moments you least expect. And sometimes, what comes after the storm is just as revealing as the storm itself. A call from Grandma. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening. I had just gotten back from a late run, the city lights glowing outside my window. When my phone buzzed, it was Grandma. "Anthony," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I don't want anything. I just wanted to hear your voice." That was Grandma in a nutshell. She never called to demand, never called to guilt trip. She called because she cared. We talked for nearly an hour. About my job. About my new city. About the books she'd been reading. Not once did she mention Melissa, the cabin, or the chaos that had once defined every family dinner. But just before we hung up, she paused. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes letting go isn't about losing. It's about making space for something better. I'm proud of you for learning that." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. Melissa's silence breaks. Weeks later though, Melissa broke her silence. This time, it wasn't a post online. It was a text. "Can we talk?" 3 words I never expected to see from her. I stared at the screen, debating. Every instinct told me it was a trap. Another manipulation. Another ploy to rope me back into her orbit. But curiosity won out. I replied simply. "About what?" Her response was quick. "Everything. I'm tired, Anthony." The meeting. We met at a small cafe, halfway between my new city and our hometown. She looked different. Older, somehow. Tired in a way that makeup couldn't cover. For the first time in years, her tone wasn't combative. She didn't launch into accusations. She just sighed. "I messed up," she admitted. "With the mortgage. With the cabin. With all of it." I raised an eyebrow. "That's new." She gave a small, sad smile. "Don't get used to it." But then her face grew serious. "I thought if I blamed you, it would make me feel better. Like it wasn't my fault. But the truth is, I made those choices. And I lost everything anyway." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she added quietly. But I needed to say it out loud. And for once, I believed her. My response. When she finished, I took a deep breath. "Melissa," I said, "I don't hate you. I never did. I just hate the way you treated me. Like my success wasn't mine. Like my boundaries were selfish. Like I owed you my future because you couldn't handle your own." Her eyes welled up. But she didn't argue. "I'm not here to gloat," I continued. "I just hope you finally understand why I said no." For the first time, she nodded. Really nodded. No eye rolls. No dramatic sighs. Just quiet acceptance. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was something. The ripple effect. After that, things began to shift. Melissa didn't magically become responsible overnight. But she stopped targeting me. She stopped dragging my name online. She even got a part-time job at a local bookstore. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. And for my parents, the tension eased. Without Melissa constantly painting me as the villain, they started reaching out more carefully, cautiously, but genuinely. It wasn't perfect. But it was better. Reflection. That meeting with Melissa taught me something unexpected. Boundaries aren't just about protecting yourself. Sometimes, they're the very thing that gives other people the chance to grow. If I had bailed her out, paid her mortgage, saved her house, she never would have hit the point where she had to admit her mistakes. By saying no, I gave her the one thing she'd never had before. Accountability. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of her turning a corner. Closing thoughts. I know not everyone gets closure like that. Not every sibling admits their mistakes. Not every family softens with time. But even if Melissa had never reached out, even if my parents had never stopped blaming me, the lesson would have been the same. You can't save people from themselves. You can't carry the weight of everyone else's choices, and you don't owe anyone your peace. Because peace hard-won, fragile, priceless, isn't just something you find. It's something you protect. And that's exactly what I'll keep doing. By now, I had accepted that my life had split into 2 distinct chapters. The one before I set boundaries, and the one after. The chapter before was filled with guilt, obligation, and a constant sense of being used. The chapter after was quieter, calmer, but also lonelier at times. And as much as I valued my peace, I couldn't ignore that loneliness completely. That's when something unexpected happened. A chance encounter. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at a local farmer's market, picking up fresh bread and vegetables. I wasn't looking for anything beyond groceries. But as I browsed a stall of handmade soaps, I heard someone say my name. "Anthony?" The Rese these consider incineri. And so his Bensinery. I turned. It was Sarah, an old friend from college. Someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. She laughed, a little awkwardly. Wow, I can't believe it's you. You haven't changed a bit. We ended up grabbing coffee nearby, catching up on everything we had missed. Her career, her family, her divorce, my move, my promotion, my drama-filled family saga, though I kept the details light. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized how much I'd missed having genuine connections outside of family obligations, building something new. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I started hanging out more. Sometimes coffee, sometimes dinner, sometimes just walking around the city. It wasn't romantic, not yet, anyway. But it was refreshing. She asked about my life without judgment. She listened when I spoke. She laughed at my stories. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me not as the responsible one, not as the fixer, but just me. The family's reaction. Of course, when my parents found out I was reconnecting with old friends, they couldn't resist making it about them. My mom called one evening. "So, you have time for friends, but not for us?" I sighed. "Mom, this isn't about time. It's about energy. I give where it feels healthy. And right now, that means friends, work, and myself." She didn't like that answer. But for once, she didn't argue. Maybe she was finally learning. Melissa's update. Meanwhile, Melissa was still trying to piece her life together. She had kept the bookstore job, which surprised me. According to Grandma, she even started paying my parents some rent for living at home. It wasn't much. But it was something. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't offer advice. But knowing she was finally making small steps toward responsibility gave me a strange sense of relief, because deep down, I didn't want her to fail. I just wanted her to stop dragging me down with her. Sarah's advice. One night, Sarah and I were sitting at a rooftop bar, the city lights glittering around us. I told her about the cabin, about Melissa, about everything. She listened quietly, then said something that stopped me cold. "You know, Anthony, you can love your family without letting them run your life. Those two things don't have to cancel each other out." I'd spent so long thinking it had to be one or the other. Either I was loyal and let them drain me, or I cut them off completely. But she was right. There was a middle ground. Boundaries, respect, balance. And for the first time, I started to believe I could find it. Grandma's health. Around this time, Grandma's health began to decline. Nothing sudden, but she was getting older, weaker. The phone calls became shorter, her handwriting shakier. I made it a point to visit her every month, no matter how busy I was. We'd sit on her porch, sipping tea, talking about everything, and nothing. One afternoon she squeezed my hand and said, "Don't waste your life carrying what isn't yours. I've done enough of that for both of us." Her words sank deep. Reflection. As I look back now, I realize the story wasn't just about Melissa demanding I pay her mortgage. It wasn't just about losing the cabin. It was about the lessons buried inside all of it. That boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary. That saying no isn't betrayal, it's survival. And that sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to step out of the role others force you into, and finally live as yourself. Closing thoughts. If you're still watching this, maybe you've been there. Maybe you've had a sibling who expected too much, or parents who leaned too hard, or family who made you feel like you were only valuable when you were sacrificing. If that's you, I want you to remember this. You're not selfish for protecting your peace, you're not cruel for setting boundaries, and you're not alone in choosing yourself. Because at the end of the day, family may shape us, but they don't own us. And sometimes, walking away from the weight of their expectations is the only way to finally stand tall on your own. Life has a way of moving forward even when you feel like pieces of it are stuck in the past. By the time the new year rolled around, I was firmly planted in my new city, focused on my career, my friendships, and the kind of quiet routines that once felt impossible when I was drowning in family drama. But of course, the past doesn't vanish. It lingers in phone calls, in emails, in family updates you didn't ask for, but get anyway. And for me, the next twist in the story came not from Melissa, but from my parents. An invitation. One Sunday morning, an envelope arrived in the mail. Handwritten, addressed to me in my mom's neat cursive. Inside was a card, an invitation. Family reunion, it read. "We'd love for you to come." I stared at it, conflicted. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and toss it in the trash. Another part of me felt that familiar tug, the small, lingering hope that maybe things could be different this time. After a long pause, I put the card on my fridge. Not a yes, not a no. Just a reminder to think. Talking it through. That week, I met up with Sarah for dinner. She noticed the heaviness in my voice immediately. "What's on your mind?" she asked. I told her about the reunion. About the invitation. About my hesitation. She nodded thoughtfully. "So, what's stopping you?" I laughed bitterly. Where do I start? The last time we all sat in one room, they were threatening to cut me out of the will if I didn't pay Melissa's mortgage. And now they want to play happy family? She smiled softly. Maybe they're trying, in their own way. Or maybe nothing's changed. But the only way you'll know is if you show up. The question is, can you handle it if they haven't changed? Her words hit hard. Could I? Grandma's voice. That night, I called Grandma. She sounded weak. But her mind was as sharp as ever. Anthony, she said, you don't have to go if it costs you your peace. But sometimes, showing up is less about them, and more about you. It's about proving to yourself that you can be in the room without letting it break you. I thought about that for a long time. Maybe she was right. The reunion was held at a local park, under a big rented tent with folding chairs and buffet tables. When I arrived, people were milling around with paper plates and red plastic cups. Kids ran in circles, laughter mixing with the sound of a rented speaker system playing old hits. It looked normal, but I was tense, scanning the crowd for Melissa. She was there, of course, standing off to the side, chatting with a cousin. She looked thinner, paler, like the stress of the past year had aged her. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod, not a smile, not a glare, just acknowledgement, and that was enough. The conversations. Throughout the afternoon, relatives came up to me. Some offered hugs, some offered awkward small talk. A few even whispered that they admired how I'd handled things with Melissa. It was surreal. For so long, I had been the villain in the story. The selfish one. The one who abandoned family. And now, people were quietly admitting they saw the truth. Not everyone, of course. Some still gave me cold looks. But I realized something important that day. I didn't need unanimous approval. I didn't need everyone to agree with me. I just needed to stand in my own truth. My parents. Eventually, my parents approached me together. My dad was the first to speak. We're glad you came. I nodded. Thanks for inviting me. The conversation was stiff at first, full of small talk about work and the weather. But then my mom said something I hadn't expected. We know things haven't been easy, she admitted. We know we asked too much of you. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first step. Melissa. Later, as the crowd thinned, Melissa walked over. She didn't look defiant. She didn't look smug. She just looked tired. Hey, she said softly. Hey, I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I know I've said it before, but I really am sorry. For all of it. This time, her voice didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded real. I nodded slowly. I know. We didn't hug. We didn't dive into deep conversation. But for the first time in years, we stood side by side without walls of anger between us, and that was enough for now. Reflection. Driving home from the reunion, I felt something I hadn't expected. Lightness. Not because everything was fixed. Not because my family was suddenly perfect, but because I had faced them on my terms and walked away intact. That was the victory. Closing thoughts. If you've ever had a family that tore you down, you know how hard it is to show up again. To risk old wounds reopening. To risk falling back into the same patterns. But sometimes, showing up is less about them, and more about proving to yourself that you've grown, that you can stand tall in the same room where you once felt small, that you can walk away, not drained, but stronger. Because growth isn't just about cutting ties. Sometimes, it's about learning you can face the past without letting it define you. And for me, that was the lesson of the reunion. After the reunion, I thought a strange kind of peace had finally settled. It wasn't the kind of peace where everything was perfect. It was fragile, tentative, like a ceasefire after a long war. But it was still peace, and that was more than I'd had in years. Of course, peace doesn't mean everything is easy. It just means you finally stop fighting battles that were never yours to begin with. Settling into my own life. Back in my city, life was good. Work was steady. Friendships were growing. And I even started exploring new hobbies. I joined a photography class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time or mental energy for. For the first time, I wasn't defined by family drama. I wasn't Anthony, the fixer. I was just Anthony, the guy who worked hard, took long runs by the river, and spent weekends experimenting with pasta recipes and lighting angles on a camera. And honestly, that felt revolutionary. Melissa's update. Then came another update. Courtesy of Grandma, Melissa had finally found something resembling stability. She was still at the bookstore, but she'd taken on extra hours. She had stopped posting those dramatic Facebook rants. And slowly, she was earning a reputation as reliable for once. Grandma sounded cautiously hopeful. She's not there yet, Anthony, she said. But maybe she's finally learning. Hearing that didn't spark anger or bitterness in me anymore. Just relief. Because I didn't need her to succeed for me. I just wanted her to stop sinking everyone else in the process. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to figure that out. A talk with Dad. One evening, my dad called. It wasn't a long conversation, just a check-in. But at the end, he said something that caught me off guard. "You were right," he admitted. "About Melissa. About the cabin. About a lot of things." Their say was the bride. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw it back in his face. I just said, "Thanks for saying that," because sometimes, the quietest acknowledgments mean the most. The shift in perspective. I realized then that this whole saga wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about proving I was right. It was about clarity. About breaking free from the roles we get shoved into, roles that suffocate us until we forget who we are. And when I finally stepped out of that role, my whole perspective shifted. Family didn't have to mean constant sacrifice. It didn't have to mean endless guilt. It could mean connection, if both sides were willing to meet halfway, and if they weren't, that was okay too. Sarah's question. Around this time, Sarah and I grew closer. One night, after a long walk along the waterfront, she asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. "Anthony, do you ever think about having a family of your own?" The question hung in the air. For years, I couldn't even think about building my own family. The weight of my parents, my sister, the endless drama, it consumed everything. But now, for the first time, I could imagine it. Not a family built on guilt and obligation, but one built on love, respect, and boundaries. And that thought didn't scare me anymore. Grandma's gift. A few weeks later, I got another letter from Grandma. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper. On it, she had written, "Peace is not the absence of storms, but the choice to stop letting them drown you. You've chosen well, don't forget it." I taped that note above my desk, and every day since, it's been a reminder of the path I chose, and why I'll never go back. Reflection. Looking back, I see the story in a new light. It started with Melissa demanding I pay her mortgage. It spiraled into family threats, lost property, and painful confrontations. But what it really was, at its core, was a lesson. A lesson in boundaries. A lesson in self-respect. A lesson in the power of saying no. And maybe, most importantly, a lesson that peace isn't given to you, it's something you claim. Closing thoughts. If you've stuck with me this far, maybe you've faced something similar. Maybe you've been caught between love and obligation, between family and yourself. Here's what I'll leave you with. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk away from roles that suffocate you. And you are allowed to build a life that's yours, even if it means losing things you thought you could never let go of. Because in the end, peace isn't about what you keep. It's about what you refuse to carry anymore. And for me, that has made all the difference. By now, life had shifted into something I never thought I'd have: stability. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, but real, steady peace. And yet, when you come from a family like mine, there's always that lingering thought in the back of your head. When's the next storm? For me, the next storm came in the form of a phone call. But it wasn't the kind I had braced myself for. The unexpected call. It was Melissa. Her name lighting up my screen made my stomach clench. For years, every call from her had meant drama, accusations, or demands. But this time, her voice was different. "Anthony," she said softly, "I just wanted to tell you I got a full-time job." I was silent for a beat, unsure how to respond. "At the bookstore?" I asked cautiously. "No," she said. "At the library. It's steady. Good hours. Benefits. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." I could hear the pride in her voice, faint but real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt toward Melissa in years. Hope. Processing the news. After we hung up, I sat there in my apartment, staring out at the skyline. Melissa had a job. A real job. Something stable. Something responsible. I thought about all the years of tension. The endless demands. The cabin. The threats. The fights. And I realized, if she had made this choice years ago, none of that would have happened. But then another thought hit me. Maybe she needed to crash all the way down before she could rebuild. Maybe she needed to lose everything: her house, her pride, even her audience online, before she could finally step into accountability. It wasn't my job to fix her. It never had been. But hearing she had finally taken even one step forward, that felt like closure. Grandma's reaction. I visited Grandma not long after. When I told her the news, her whole face lit up. "Maybe she's finally growing up," she said, her voice trembling with both relief and disbelief. "Better late than never." I nodded. "Yeah. Better late than never." She squeezed my hand. "And you, Anthony, you helped this happen. Not by giving in, but by refusing to. If you had kept rescuing her, she never would have learned." I had never thought of it that way. But she was right. My no had been the wake-up call Melissa needed. Even if she hated me for it at the time, The family dinner. A few months later, I went back home for dinner. This time, the energy in the room was different. My parents were still cautious, still careful with their words, but lighter somehow. And Melissa? She actually smiled when she saw me. Not a smug smile. Not a manipulative one. A real, tired, but genuine smile. Throughout dinner, she talked about her new job. The people she worked with. The books she was discovering. She sounded grounded. It was strange, hearing her speak without bitterness, without demands, without guilt. For once, it felt like maybe we were siblings again. Reflection. Driving back that night, I couldn't help but reflect. All those fights, all that pain, it had felt unbearable at the time. But maybe it had all been leading here, to a place where Melissa finally learned, where my parents finally saw, and where I finally found peace. I realized something important. Sometimes, saying no isn't just for your sake. Sometimes, it's the only thing that gives others the chance to grow. A conversation with Mom. Not long after, my mom called me. "Anthony," she said quietly, "I want to thank you for not giving up on the family, even when things were bad. For standing your ground. For teaching us something we didn't want to learn." I swallowed hard. "Thanks, Mom." There was a pause, and then she added, "We didn't see it at the time. But you were right. About all of it. There's like they happens meant to eder of their on morrow." Those words, simple as they were, felt like the closure I had been waiting for. Peace. Finally. So, here's where I stand now. Melissa has a job. My parents respect my boundaries. My relationship with Grandma is stronger than ever. And me? I have my life back. Not the life they wanted for me. Not the life defined by constant sacrifice. But my life steady, calm, and finally mine. Closing thoughts. If you've been through something like this, if you've been the sibling who carried too much, or the child who was always expected to give more, I want you to hear this. It's okay to say no. It's okay to draw a line. And it's okay if that no feels like it's breaking everything apart, because sometimes, that's the only way for things to be rebuilt the right way. Family might not always understand. They might even hate you for it at first. But in the end, holding your boundaries is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. And for them. And if you're lucky, one day you'll look back, like I do now, and realize that saying no was the beginning of everything good that came after. When Melissa told me she had a full-time job, it felt like a turning point. Not just for her, but for all of us. For years, the weight of her choices had hung over the family like a storm cloud. And for years, I had been expected to be the umbrella. But now, for the first time, it seemed like she was learning to carry her own load. That didn't erase the past. But it did change the way I looked at the future. Grandma's words. One afternoon, I visited Grandma again. We sat on her porch, sipping tea like we always did. She looked at me, her eyes soft but sharp. "Anthony," she said, "you've given your sister the greatest gift without realizing it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You let her fail," Grandma said simply. "You let her face the consequences. Everyone else tried to cushion her. You didn't. And that's what finally made her grow. Thank you for watching the Now or So Me. From Sittard Not the Round the Watching the Choir to Cower to Catter." Her words sank deep. Because for so long, I had felt guilty about saying no. Guilty about walking away. But maybe that guilt had been misplaced all along. The shift. The next time I saw Melissa, she carried herself differently. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't suddenly glow with success. But there was a quiet steadiness about her I hadn't seen before. She talked about work schedules, about saving money, about paying my parents' rent. For once, her words weren't filled with excuses. They were filled with plans. And though part of me still kept my guard up, another part started to believe maybe, just maybe, she was finally changing. My parents too were different. They still slipped into old habits, sometimes small comments about how family should stick together. Little reminders of how things used to be. But they didn't push the way they used to. They didn't guilt trip me. They didn't demand. I think losing the cabin had been a wake-up call. A reminder that enabling Melissa had real consequences, not just for her, but for everyone. And maybe, just maybe, they had finally learned. Sarah. Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah deepened. We weren't rushing into anything. But there was a comfort between us that I hadn't felt in years. She reminded me what it was like to have someone in my corner, someone who didn't want anything from me except honesty. One evening, over dinner, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, Anthony, you've been carrying this story for so long. Maybe it's time to start writing a new one." She was right. For too long, my life had been defined by family drama. By Melissa's demands, by my parents' expectations. But I didn't want that to be my whole story. A new vision. I started thinking about the future differently, not in terms of what I was running from, but what I was building toward. Maybe one day, that would mean a family of my own. Maybe it would mean new adventures, new places, new challenges, but whatever it meant, it would be on my terms. With boundaries, with respect, with peace. And that realization felt like freedom. Reflection. Looking back, I realized something I hadn't before. This whole saga wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage, or the cabin, or the endless fights. It was about identity. About reclaiming who I was outside of the role my family had cast me in. For years, I had been the responsible one. The fixer. The safety net. But now, I was just Anthony. And that was enough. Closing thoughts. If you've ever been where I was, if you've felt crushed by the weight of family expectations, if you've been told that saying no makes you selfish, hear this. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. Doors that let in peace, self-respect, and freedom. And sometimes, those doors don't just protect you. They give others the chance to finally grow. That's what I learned. And that's the story I carry now. By this point, my life felt like it had shifted onto a completely new track. The drama with Melissa, the constant guilt tripping from my parents, the endless battles over money, all of it had defined my 20s and early 30s. But now, in this new chapter, I was finally learning to breathe again. It didn't mean the past was erased. The scars were still there. But instead of weighing me down, they had become reminders of what I would never allow again. Building forward, I poured myself into the new life I was creating. Work was fulfilling. I had started mentoring a few younger employees at the office, teaching them the lessons I wished someone had taught me earlier. How to set boundaries, how to advocate for themselves, how to recognize when they were being taken advantage of. Outside of work, I found joy in the small things. Morning runs, weekend hikes, photography projects that challenged me to see the world differently. And slowly, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually living. Melissa's progress. Updates about Melissa trickled in, usually through grandma, or, occasionally, my mom. She was still working at the library. She had started saving money. She was talking about maybe moving into a small apartment of her own within the year. It wasn't dramatic progress. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. And for once I didn't feel resentment hearing it. I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Instead, I felt proud. Not because I had fixed her, far from it. But because she was finally doing what she should have been doing, all along. Standing on her own. My parents' shift. My parents were different too. They were still themselves, still quick with unsolicited advice, still prone to reminiscing about the good old days. But something had shifted. They no longer treated me like a bottomless well of resources. They no longer expected me to solve Melissa's problems. Instead, when we talked, they asked about me. About my work, my city, my life. It felt strange. Almost foreign. But it was also healing, because for the first time, they were seeing me not as the fixer, but as their son. Sarah's presence. And then there was Sarah. What started as casual reconnection had grown into something deeper. She became a steady presence in my life. Supportive, kind, and grounding in a way I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, we were walking through the park when she said, "You know, Anthony, your story isn't just about what you went through. It's about what you chose afterward. You could have stayed bitter, stayed trapped, but you didn't. You built something new." Her words stuck with me. Because she was right. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. Grandma's health. As the months went on, Grandma's health continued to decline. Each visit felt more precious, each conversation more meaningful. She didn't have the energy she used to, but her wisdom never faded. One afternoon, as we sat together in the quiet of her living room, she said, "Anthony, promise me something." "Anything," I replied. "Promise me you'll keep choosing peace, even when it's hard, because that's the only thing that lasts." I squeezed her hand and promised. And I meant it. Reflection. Looking back, I realized how far things had come. From the phone call where Melissa demanded I pay her mortgage, to the bitter fights over the cabin, to the family dinners that felt like battlefields. Those moments had nearly broken me. But they had also remade me. They taught me to stand up for myself. They taught me to value peace over appearances. And they taught me that love doesn't mean sacrifice without limits. Closing thoughts. If you've made it this far, maybe you've carried the same kind of weight I did. Maybe you've been the one who held everything together while no one held you. Maybe you've been told that family means giving until there's nothing left of you. But here's what I've learned. Family can be love. But love without respect is just control. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. And choosing peace, even when it costs you something, is never the wrong choice. Because at the end of the day, peace isn't just freedom from chaos. It's the foundation for everything good that comes after. And for me, that's the life I'm finally living. The funny thing about peace is that once you taste it, you start to realize how little you ever had it before. In the past, my life was measured in crises. Melissa's latest demand, my parents' guilt trips, the looming threat of losing the cabin. It was constant noise. Constant tension. Now, the quiet felt almost strange, but in the best way. Life in balance. In my city, I had finally settled into routines that weren't about survival, but about joy. Mornings started with runs by the river. Evenings often ended with photography projects or quiet dinners with Sarah. Work was fulfilling, not draining, and I no longer felt like I was carrying a second unpaid full-time job just managing my family's chaos. It felt like life had shifted from black and white to full color. Melissa's continued growth. Updates about Melissa kept coming, usually through grandma or my mom. She had not only kept her library job but had been promoted to a supervisory role. She was paying rent, keeping up with bills, and even starting to save. It wasn't the dramatic success story some people might imagine, but for Melissa, it was huge. And the most surprising part? She wasn't blaming me anymore. I didn't get passive-aggressive texts. I didn't get cryptic Facebook posts. Just silence and, in its own way, respect. Parents easing up. My parents were slowly changing too. They no longer pressured me with guilt trips about stepping up for family. Instead, our conversations were about everyday life. What I was cooking, how work was going. My mom even asked about my photography, genuinely curious rather than dismissive. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments where old habits slipped through, but overall, it felt like the weight between us had lightened. A moment with Grandma. Grandma's health was declining, but her clarity was still sharp. One evening, I visited her and told her about Melissa's progress. She smiled, her hands resting on mine. See, Anthony? Sometimes the hardest no brings the strongest growth. You carried enough for long enough. Now you get to watch her learn to carry herself. Her words filled me with a quiet pride. Because for so long, I had doubted myself. Wondered if saying no had been selfish. Wondered if I had done the wrong thing. But now, it was clear. That no had been the most loving thing I could have done for her, for my parents, and for myself. Sarah's role. Through all of this, Sarah became an anchor. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she said, "Anthony, do you realize you've built a whole new life? One that's not about what you had to escape, but what you've chosen to create?" Her words stopped me. Because she was right. I wasn't just running from the past anymore. I was building toward a future. A future defined not by obligation, but by choice. Reflection. As I think about it now, I see the arc so clearly. It started with Melissa's demand that I pay her mortgage. It spiraled into chaos, threats, family battles, the loss of the cabin. For years, it felt like I was drowning. But in the end, all of it forced me to learn the lesson I'd been avoiding. That peace isn't given to you by others. You claim it for yourself. And when you do, everything changes. Closing thoughts. If you've ever carried the kind of weight I did, I want to remind you, you're allowed to say no. You're allowed to build a life that's yours. And you're allowed to choose peace. Even when others call it selfish. Because, at the end of the day, the people who love you will learn to respect your boundaries. And the people who don't? They were never respecting you to begin with. That's the lesson I carry now. By now, the storm had long passed. Melissa had her own job. My parents had eased up. And Grandma's wisdom had become the compass I carried into every decision. I had reclaimed my peace, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next disaster. But endings aren't really endings. They're transitions. And this final part of the story isn't about loss, it's about what came after. Grandma's last lesson. Not long after Melissa started steady work, Grandma's health declined quickly. I was by her side as much as I could be. We talked about everything: life, choices, regrets, and love. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "Anthony, you're proof that strength isn't about carrying the most weight. It's about knowing when to set it down." Those words were her final gift to me. When she passed, the family gathered. For once, there were no fights, no accusations, no drama. Just grief, and the quiet acknowledgement that she had been the glue holding us together. And as I stood there, I realized something. The lesson she had taught me wasn't just for my family. It was for my life. Melissa at the funeral. At the funeral, Melissa approached me. Her eyes were red, her voice soft. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Not for money, not for saving me, but for finally making me face myself." I nodded. "You don't have to thank me. Just keep going. That's thanks enough." For the first time, I believed she would. The cabin's shadow. After Grandma's passing, talk of the cabin surfaced again. Not in anger this time, but in memories. People shared stories, fishing trips, birthdays, summer nights under the stars. The pain of losing it was still there, but somehow lighter. Because I realized, the cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was the moments inside it. And those moments lived on. Even if the property didn't. A new chapter. Back in my city, I started focusing more on my future. Sarah and I grew closer. We didn't rush, but there was something solid between us. She was steady, kind, and real. With her, I didn't feel like the fixer. I didn't feel like the one holding the world up. I just felt like myself, and for the first time, I started imagining what it would be like to build something new with her. Or with someone. On my own terms. Reflection. Looking back on the entire journey, I see it clearly now. It began with a demand that I pay Melissa's mortgage. It spiraled into fights, threats, guilt, and the loss of the cabin. At the time, it felt like my world was falling apart, but in truth, it was falling into place. Because those battles forced me to learn what I had avoided for years. That family love without respect is just control. And peace is something you choose, not something you beg for. Closing thoughts. So here's the final takeaway. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are not alone in choosing yourself. Even when the people closest to you don't understand. Sometimes the hardest no is the one that saves you. And sometimes, it's the one that gives the people around you the chance to grow. 2. Melissa didn't need me to pay her mortgage. She needed me to stop paying it. My parents didn't need me to fix everything. They needed me to let them face the consequences. And I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace. And now, I have it.